One of the priority areas for Earthwatch research over the next 10 years is looking at the world's oceans. A key part of that is understanding what's happening to the coral reef. The coral reef is a good indicator of the health of the oceans. Traditionally, people have looked at the number of fish and the health of the fish as an indicator of the health of the coral reef. That's where the research of Paul and Donna is so important. By looking at the parasites that the fish are carrying, they're able to understand, are the fish healthy? And more importantly, beyond the fish, is the reef healthy?
We're looking at the dynamics between parasites that infect coral reef fishes and the coral reef fish hosts, as well as the cleaning organisms that remove parasites from the host fish, and how that dynamic is influenced or affected by changes that we see on the reef.
So our research is taking a look at some of the most intimate relationships that are happening among coral reef organisms. The parasites, their fish hosts, and the cleaning stations that they visit to get those parasites removed. And so in order to do that, we need to go into the coral reef environment at the times when these things are happening. In the morning when the fish are visiting the cleaning stations, or at night when the fish are resting. So at nighttime, many of the fish that we're interested in are actually sleeping. And even though fish don't have eyelids, they do sleep by resting on the bottom at night. And so we're able to approach the fish very closely and then catch them individually and then bring them back to the lab where we can collect the data from them.
Well, as you might imagine, a sitting target is much easier to catch than a moving target. And we tried with limited success catching these fish during the daytime, but we found that going out at night was much easier. Because they're in their shelter holes and we can find them stationary. So the way we do this is we go out off a boat or off of the beach, depending on the site, and we bring flashlights and aquarium nets. And we dive down and find the fish that we are interested in capturing, and we shine the light in the fish's eyes, and it mobilizes the fish, and then we capture it with an aquarium net and then put it in a bait bucket. We then have snorkelers who act as runners or swimmers. They when we fill up a bucket of fish, they will take the bucket and swim back to shore, where we empty it into a larger container and then transport it back to the laboratory. And then another snorkeler will swim the bucket back out to us. So we have this rotation of buckets. We have 2 to 3 divers down collecting fish. This takes a lot of time, and without the help of Earthwatch volunteers, we could not process very many fish in a night. So we're able, with their help, to process 40 to 50 fish a night. As you might imagine, it would be much easier for us to go out on a reef and spear a fish and bring it back to the lab, and we can process it at our leisure. But we take a lot of care to minimize the impact we have on the reef. So we spend the extra time to process the fish alive and return it to the reef alive. What this involves is placing the fish in a bucket of fresh water, which we call our fish bath service, our fish spa service, and we remove the parasites.
So when we get the fish back to the lab, we put them into a bath of fresh water, which is strong enough to knock the parasites off of the fish, but not long enough to cause damage to the fish itself.
Just giving them a clean and trying to brush off as many of the parasites as we can. So it's basically just giving them a massage.
Yeah, we have 2 more and then we can start.
There's other kinds of information that are not managed. Yes.
The substrate they live in is rocks.
So we soak the fish in fresh water, and the parasites fall off. There we go.
Yeah, last 2.
It's been found that about 5 minutes is the right amount of time. So we'll give this guy just a quick rinse down.
We then transfer the fish to a recovery bucket of seawater, a recovery tank of seawater, and then we have the parasites in the bucket. We filter the bucket through some very fine plankton mesh, and then we put red dye in the container with the parasites, because these parasites are much easier to see when they're stained red. If you go snorkeling on a coral reef, what your eye catches are the interactions among the large things, the large reef fishes and large invertebrates and turtles. And what you don't see are the tiny things that have a huge effect on those interactions. For example, small parasitic isopods that are hopping on fish like marine ticks, sucking blood and then hopping off. When a fish wakes up at dawn, it's often covered with these isopod parasites, which cause them to seek cleaning organisms on the reef. You don't see parasitic flatworms hopping on surgeonfish at night, but you see those surgeonfish visiting cleaner shrimps during the day. So the little things that we're looking at, the tiny things that you don't see, have a lot to do with what's happening on the reef, and that's what we're studying. We're studying those small things that are really important but go under the radar.
Could you tell me what you're doing?
This is a analocrid isopod that hangs onto the French grit, and I'm using my forceps to lift his legs off of the orbit, the eye socket there. See those strong hooks that are hanging on to the bottom of the eye socket, and they are very, very strong little guys. I get one pair of legs off and he grabs on the other, and you can see he's opened up a wound on the cheek of the fish to feed on the blood there. And this is a female, she's full of eggs. You can open up this pouch and you can see all the eggs inside, making more babies.
So we get the data from the parasites that fall off, and then those fish are then carefully returned back to the same reef where we collected them initially. So by using this technique of dipping the fish in fresh water and then returning them back to the reef, we're ensuring that our kind of data collection is not having further negative impacts on the environment that we're trying to understand.
Right, so a cleaning station is a place on the reef that has a cleaner goby or a shrimp, or maybe both actually, where fish go to have parasites removed. So these are very consistent and easily identifiable places on the reef. The fish know where they are, and we know where they are. Fish with higher parasite loads has 2 choices. One, to go visit cleaners more or spend longer time at cleaning stations. The other is not to do that. The consequences of not doing that mean that you have higher parasite loads. The consequence of spending more time in a cleaning station means that you have less time for spawning, less time for nest defense, less time for feeding, the other things that are important to fish.
Many studies in conservation have looked primarily at biodiversity in terms of how many species you actually find in a habitat as a sense of whether or not it's a healthy place or not. And what we're finding more and more is that understanding the biocomplexity of an area, that is the interactions among the organisms that live there, is just as important as knowing who is there.
What we find is that and the sites that are more pristine, have higher coral cover, we tend to find fewer parasites on fish than in the sites that have lower coral cover and that are more heavily impacted. So we can extrapolate on that and look at what the consequences might be of climate change on parasite loads. And there are several ways that climate change can affect that. First of all, as you change the amount of coral cover, for example, and have an increase in algal cover, you may have more hiding spots for parasites. or you may have less habitat for cleaner gobies and shrimps. Both result in higher parasite loads, or at least higher ectoparasite loads. Furthermore, effects on the habitat, either by warming or changes in water chemistry, can have negative effects on the fish's immune system, which makes it more difficult for the fish to fight back against infestation. So all those things combined could result in extremely high parasite loads for fish.
Our research is successful. We hope that we'll have a better understanding of the importance of these cleaning stations to the health of the fish on the reef. And by having a better look or better understanding of how all of these organisms are interconnected and how they help one another, we have a better sense of the kinds of components or structures in the reef that we need to better protect.